So I'd like to thank my collaborators. Rich Lucas is actually here with us today. You heard from him earlier. This is also some collaborative work with Jennifer Kornman and Deborah Carr of Rutgers University. I don't have any music or video. I'm really sorry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about aging and disability. So let's start with the aging piece. So we heard earlier this morning that as adults age, they focus more on more emotionally positive aspects of their lives. And as a result, well-being often increases or stays high despite declining health and functioning in later life. There have been a number of studies of both evaluative and positive experienced well-being that suggest there's a U-shaped relationship over the adult life cycle, with the low point being just about where I am, in middle age, and more satisfaction or happiness reported both at younger and older ages. Now, within later life, satisfaction and positive emotions, they actually appear, if you look really carefully, there haven't been a lot of studies that look within later life, but when they do, it seems to peak in the mid-70s before declining back to pre-retirement levels. So that's important to keep in mind as we go through this talk today. Those are the positive emotions, but the negative emotions, they have a much less consistent pattern, with anger, stress, and worry declining within later life, but sadness increasing kind of in the early 70s. Now, let's talk a little bit about disability and health and functioning. So maintenance of health and functioning appears to be strongly related to positive subjective well-being in later life. There's tons of studies, and George did a nice summary of them in 2010. Most of the psychological literature on this topic has focused on hedonic adaptation theory, sort of starting with Freedman and Campbell in the 1970s, that assert that individuals adapt to life events, that those life events that result in negative material conditions, including disability. So disability is one of many conditions that people initially react negatively to, but the theory is because of internal set points, they come back to their pre-disability levels. Now, evidence for this is actually quite weak, and Rich Lucas has done a really nice review of the evidence thus far. And if there is, if people do come back, it appears to be, if there is adaptation, it appears to be incomplete. Okay. So prior work that I've been involved with, we took a look at older couples, people who were 60 and older, and we found that no matter what the measure of well-being that we looked at, those with a disability in later life reported worse subjective well-being than those without. This is sort of consistent with the incomplete adaptation that the literature has found. What we were interested in is understanding the gap. What accounts for the gap? Why do older individuals who experience disability in later life have worse well-being? What is it about their experience that leads to this? In that paper, we couldn't explain it, and we tried to account for demographic factors as well as economic characteristics, as well as differential activity profiles. So we had daily diaries. And we could not, we found 71 fewer pleasant minutes over the course of a day for older adults with disability, and we could not make that go away. So the focus today is expanding on that line of research and bringing in the mixed emotion piece. So the work I'm going to present, we explore the relationship between disability and subjective well-being, not just among couples, but among all older adults. So we have a larger sample this round. We're going to focus on experienced well-being. We're going to look at one emotion at a time and explore the role of social. We now have psychological factors as well and social factors as well, in addition to economic and time use factors, to see if we can account for differences in late life in emotion between those with and without disability. And then as a second step, explore factors, including disability, that predict mixed emotions, and I'll define that for you in a minute in terms of how we've been thinking about it. So this is a theoretical framework we use to guide our work when we try to understand the relationship between disability and experienced well-being. The top half of this, let's see, I don't know how to do this part either. Okay, so where it says health conditions leads to impairments in body structures, body functions and structures, and that's related to activity limitations. This is a common framework for understanding disablement in later life. It flows out of the disability literature. Disability may or may not affect the activities that take place in later life, and that in turn affects experienced well-being. What you're doing and the context of who you're with and where you are affect how you feel. That's the basic framework. And in addition, we assert that psychological, social, and economic resources are confounders in this relationship between disability and experienced well-being. So it may be that your social relationships affect both, your economic opportunities affect both. And this is how we're going to proceed through. Now, to talk a little bit about mixed emotions, the terminology I'm going to use today, this is very new. I have not given this a lot of thought, so I'm very interested in people's reactions. I think about mixed meaning positive and negative. So the question here is, what leads to heightened emotions, both heightened positive and negative emotions? What leads to dampened emotions? So what has a negative effect on both negative and positive emotions? Let's see, do I have this? There we go. So this would be a factor has a positive effect on both positive and negative emotions. And this would, dampening is where the same factor has a negative effect on both positive and negative emotions. This is harder to explain than I thought. Negative substitution is where a factor like disability might cause you to feel more negative emotions and it pushes out the positive emotions. So there's a positive effect on negative emotions and a negative effect on positive emotions, and this is just the opposite. So let's walk through a quick example. Heightened emotions, the UM-MSU football game. I don't know if anybody caught that. There was a lot of heightened emotion there at the end, both positive and negative. Thank you from the back row. Dampened emotions might be things like resting, or if you're doing very mundane tasks. You're not feeling particularly happy, but you're also not feeling particularly sad. And so something may lead to dampened mixed emotions. Doing your taxes, let's say, may make you miserable, and it also might lessen your happiness. And then an example of positive substitution might be winning the lottery, let's say. So you're very, very happy, and it pushes out all the negative feelings as well. So in thinking about mixed emotions this way, we recognize that positive emotions tend to be more correlated than negative emotions, and we can distinguish between selective and non-selective negative effects. And by selective effects, I mean, for example, let's say a factor pushes up happiness and it pushes down only one negative emotion, but not all of them. So that would be a selective negative substitution. A non-selective, which would be a widespread pattern, would mean it pushes up happiness and it pushes down all your negative emotions. So it's very selective. I mean, it's non-selective. It operates the same way on all the negative emotions. So the data that we used for this analysis comes from the panel study of income dynamics. This is the longest running national panel study in I believe the world. Certainly in the United States. It started in 1968. We began following a sample of about 5,000 families. And as children grew up and left their parents' house, we followed those children, and now we're following their grandchildren. So in 2013, we administered a supplement to people who participated in the panel study of income dynamics. 1,700 or so adults ages 60 and older, and their spouses and partners if they were married, completed 3,500 diaries. These are, the diaries we created were based on the DRM methodology. We began with the American Time Use Study method of asking people everything they did yesterday. And after the diary was completed, we asked them to report on 3 randomly selected activities, and we asked them to report about several different emotions. So it was a 30 to 40 minute diary with 15 to 20 minutes of supplemental questions that asked all about their health and their functioning, their marital quality. We had some stylized time use questions. The experienced well-being measures that we collected were the intensity of 5 emotions and 2 somatic symptoms, as I mentioned, for 3 randomly selected activities. We asked them how intensely they felt, from 0, not at all, to 6, very strong. And today I'm just going to focus on 4 of those, 4 of the 5 emotions: happy in conjunction with frustrated, worried, and sad. Our measures of disability were extremely rich because we got to add them to the study. So we have a dichotomous indicator of whether or not someone reported a disability. And in addition, we have measures of the severity of the underlying impairments that led to the disability. So we asked people if they had a particular impairment in the last 7 days, and if so, on how many of those last 7 days did it limit their activities. So this is a severity index that we created. In addition, we have measures of psychological factors. The Big 5 personality measure was included. We have measures of spirituality and self-efficacy. Social information that we have included measures of their marital status and relationship quality, as well as their family relationship quality. And the PSID is known for its very rich and detailed and high-quality economic measures, so we also have income and wealth quartiles. By using the diary, we were able to code in excruciating detail everything people did over the previous 24 hours, and these are the activity types that we created for this analysis that we controlled for. In terms of the modeling approach, we ran nested ordinary least squares regression models. We tried several others in prior work, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you're using a least squares model or if you code it up in other ways or transform the outcome. We do adjust the standard errors for the fact that we have multiple measures within individual. We first model demographic factors, disability, and severity of impairments. Then we add to it the control, the potential confounders I mentioned, and then a kind of grouping at a time to see what accounts for the relationship, and then we add all the factors. Now for the mixed emotions, we used a jointly estimated model. So we jointly modeled all 4 emotions, and this provides an estimate of rho, which can be interpreted as the correlation between the emotions net of everything we've observed or measured, controlled for in the models. And then we took an extra step and we stratified this joint model by disability status, and we actually used the first and fourth quartiles of severity of impairment to see if mixed emotions and the predictors of mixed emotions varied for people with severe and non-severe limitations. So let's take a look at some of those results. We found, like we did before, that older adults with disability report more frustration, more worry, and more sadness. We didn't see in the unadjusted models significant differences in reports of happiness. In terms of severity of impairment, when we broke people down by quartiles, here we do see differences across the board in happiness and frustration, in reports of worry and reports of sadness. So the amount of impairment is more important than whether you're categorized as having a disability or not. That's the takeaway there. In terms of, we also had a measure of duration of impairment, which is how long the underlying condition, the individual had the underlying condition, and there is no linear relationship between duration and happiness. You do see a little bit more frustration in that first to second year. That's what the second category is, and a little bit more worry, somewhat consistent with the hedonic adaptation hypothesis. Now the other thing is when we look at respondents with severe impairment, we see that they're older, they have higher levels of neuroticism, less extroversion, lower levels of conscientiousness. They're more spiritual, but they have less self-efficacy. A lot of this is known from the literature on disability. It's not new, but it's very reassuring to see it in the national sample. They report lower quality relationships, fewer economic resources, and they're less likely to work and exercise. They're more likely to be at home, and they're more likely to report that their day was typical. So those are some of the differences that could account for the relationships that we see between disability and well-being. So this is kind of the long and short of it. In the unadjusted models, we see that these are consistent with the bar graphs I showed you. These are the coefficients on severity of impairment. So each additional point on the impairment scale, people report being about half a point less happy, 0.05%. More frustrated, more worried, and sadder. When we control for each of these groups of activities, let's see if I can get this to work. After we control for everything, we see that about 20 to 40% of the impairment effect is accounted for by psychological, social, economic, and factors and activities. But really, it's the social and psychological factors that are accounting for this. It's not the other groupings. And all the psychologists in the room are nodding. That's right, that makes sense to you. The economists didn't think that was true, though. So the other thing I wanted to point out is that this finding is consistent with negative, what I would call negative substitution. So it's kind of pushing out the happy feelings and bringing in the negative feelings, and it's non-selective. So it's all of them. These are the correlations among the emotions after controlling for all of those variables that I showed you in the model. These are adjusted. And so you see, not surprisingly, correlations that are inverse between happy and frustrated, worried, and sad, and positive correlations here. The one that I think is interesting is when we stratify the model by severity quartile, you see a much stronger relationship among people with high severity of limitations between frustrated and happy than you do for people who don't have impairments. There you see the stronger relationship between sad and happy. So this is what you might expect, that sad is the opposite of happy. I saw a lot of circumplexes up there today that suggested sad was the opposite. But for older adults with limitations, it looks like frustrated is more of an opposite than sad. And in terms of what factors predict mixed emotions, besides severity of disability, the only other factor that predicted that was, predictably, neuroticism. Family quality was related to positive substitution, and let's see, dampened emotion was related to kind of mundane tasks like laundry and housework. We didn't find anything that was related to heightened emotion. So pushing up both positive and negative emotions. We didn't find anything related to that. Here are the factors that predict mixed emotions in the stratified models. So there are very different processes going on for older adults with and without severe limitations. So for those without severe impairment, having a romantic partner compared to being single leads to negative substitution. Okay. And going out for pleasure leads to positive substitution. But we don't see that operating in the fourth quartile of severity of impairment. For this group, we still see that very strong neuroticism effect. That doesn't pop up in the group without limitations. Okay, so to summarize, am I good? Okay. The severity of limitations is related to subjective well-being in later life, and it's partially accounted for by psychological and social, but not economic or activity-related factors. Severity of limitations is related to negative substitution. It does not appear to be selective. And negative substitution with frustration is stronger at higher levels of severity. At lower levels, negative substitution with sadness is stronger. Okay. The process of generating mixed emotions in later life appears to differ by level of impairment. Among those with severe impairments, psychological factors predict mixed emotions, but among those with few or no impairments, social and activity-related factors predict mixed emotions. So that may be something to think about as we're trying to understand mixed emotions in later life, that levels of impairment may matter. And again, none of the predictors that we examined were found to be related to heightened emotion in later life. We could talk a lot about the limitations. Probably the most obvious one is that these are self-reported cross-sectional relationships. This is not a dynamic model. We're not looking over time within individuals. And clearly, we only looked at a very limited number of emotions. We picked one positive emotion, but only 3 negative emotions. And just to really say that this is non-selective, I think we need a greater range. I liked the 24 that we saw earlier. Was it 24 we saw earlier? Next steps, I think, are really, we also have measures of how tired and how much pain people feel. So I feel a paper on tired, achy, and miserable coming on. We can examine how positive and negative emotions correlate with somatic reports of being tired and in pain, and we think that's a next step. That's it. Oh, I wanted to mention that the data are publicly available if anybody is interested. They're linkable to the panel study of income dynamics, which is a very, very rich opportunity to do your own work, and you can register and download the data at psidonline.org. Thanks.